Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablan.
Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This episode of the QCMP is sponsored by Midwood Guitar Studio, Charlotte, North Carolina's own boutique guitar shop located in Plaza Midwood. Midwood Guitar Studio not only has the finest selection of boutique guitars, but familiar names like Fender, Martin, Taylor, Two Rock, and many others. Whether it's a guitar, bass, amp, effects pedal, or a much-needed accessory, the knowledgeable and friendly staff at Midwood Guitar Studio will help guide you in the right direction for your next purchase. Midwood Guitar Studio also has a luthier on staff for all your repair needs. Visit their website at midwoodguitarstudio.com or stop in to see their unique shop at 1517 Central Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina. By the way, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to find out more about me, head over to MatthewAblan.com. There you'll find links to my events calendar, current and past podcast episodes, my performance groups, and a whole host of other information. This month on episode 75 of the Queen City Music Podcast, the microphone gets flipped on me. My old friend Ken Kellner is visiting and he wanted to interview me. Ken is a musician and music educator from Richmond, Virginia, and we've known each other since the second grade. Not only that, we started getting into and playing music at the same time. So when Ken wanted to interview me on my own podcast, I couldn't say no. Ken Kellner, thanks for coming up with this idea. It's a real role reversal for me.
I'm very excited about it myself. I can't imagine anyone better poised to interview than me. I've known you for so long. For the listeners, let's remind or let's talk about how we know each other. I believe it was in second grade.
Yes. Yeah.
In Minnesota Elementary School in Setauket, New York.
Yeah.
And I was wearing a Fantastic Four, It's Clobbering Time
Thing shirt.
The Thing.
Yes. And
I believe Star Wars action figures might have been 1977. Star Wars was just out. And
yes.
It's fair to say that Star Wars was had a phenomenal impact on our imaginations in our childhood.
Yeah. And I think we got introduced by another mutual friend. Like, I don't really remember if that's true. I do remember you coming out of nowhere with that Thing shirt running down the hill. And I don't know how. I don't know who introduced us, what happened, but we became friends.
We were 7 years old. We are in 1977, and we loved Star Wars, and we got along real well.
Yeah.
And
we were like attached at the hip for like, oh my God, all of elementary school.
Okay, so this would be a great time to just talk about fast forward. Now we're in our mid-50s.
Yeah.
And we're very similar. We were both elementary school music teachers.
Yeah.
Devoted our lives to music, and we both gig and play live music at night.
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of the differences between you and I as well. You've done some things that I just haven't done, but that's all coming up. So here we are in the mid to late 70s, and let's talk about your environment, your musical environment. You grew up in a working class neighborhood near the local high school, but we're going back into the 1970s, and I want you to paint a picture of how you were exposed to music. What kind of music was playing in the household? Did you have a relative who played music? Did you have family members? What records were being played? What are your first musical memories that were meaningful to you?
That's going back. All right. So first musical memories. One, my mother's stepfather, played piano. So my grandfather was always playing piano, singing old time songs. And down in his basement, they had a finished basement, and family would gather at times, and we'd go downstairs. My grandfather always, at some point, retired down there, and he'd play. And he played accordion and played a little guitar. He was a wonderful amateur musician. But also, as I grew up in my house, my first song that I found myself attached to, which we were discussing it yesterday, was Glenn Campbell's Rhinestone Cowboy. I don't know why I got attached to that song. It may have been like on BJ and the Bear, if you remember that TV show, something like out there. I got attached to this song. My mother bought me this 45 of it, and I remember playing it on my record player, and over and over and over again, I could not stop playing that song. I don't remember if it was before or after. The Rhinestone Cowboy was the first thing, but then there was a show, the Hardy Boys Mysteries or something like that. There was a guy on that show, Sean something or other, and he did a cover of an old pop tune called Do Run Run. And it was another song. I just love that song. And I got the record for that. And I used to play that song over and over.
I met her on a Monday and my heart
That's
still.
it, yes.
Do run, 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 a do run, run.
Yes.
That was very common for us to like watch TV shows and have them break into song.
Yeah.
There was a lot of song in the 70s. So, all right. So you had a family record player or you had your own?
I had my own, this own little yellow one, as did my brother. But at some point, my father became a quote-unquote audiophile and went out and bought a stereo system for whatever reason. I don't know where he got it from. Had an 8-track player. We had a record player. And I also remember at that time, I don't know what year the film came out, but Saturday Night Fever, my dad got the 8-track to Saturday Night Fever. And I would listen to that soundtrack over and over too. I fell in love with that soundtrack.
That's part of the late 70s cultural environment. Star Wars and Saturday Night Fever for sure. Older brother?
Yes.
Did he play a role in the music you were influenced?
He didn't play an instrument, but he definitely played a role because my brother, being 3 years older, we used to hang out next door with my neighbors. And my neighbors, of course, were older. But one of my neighbors was a drummer in local bands on Long Island, and he was a fantastic, still probably one of the most amazing drummers like I ever met playing. Alan was just a fantastic player. And my brother would listen to the music that he was listening to and get turned on by him. So my brother would come home and he'd go buy whatever, Led Zeppelin and Police and all that kind of stuff. But the first real influential thing was probably for an album my brother borrowed from my cousin, which is an album called Heavy Metal. And my brother brought it home, and it was a compilation. I remember listening to it, and the needle dropped on Black Sabbath's Iron Man. And I remember hearing the boom, boom on the bass drum, doom, doom, and then the guitar, and I was like, what is that? And it just, boom, that was it.
Yeah, that kind of moment where you're like, what is that? That's part of like the childhood that we grew up in, where we would see or hear something and it would blow our minds. All right, so now you have your influences, your earliest influences in place. You have exposure to a real musician in your family. You are being exposed to the current music, hard rock music at the time. So we both were in elementary school music together.
Yeah.
We were both and that's interesting because now we're both elementary school music teachers. But I don't recall much about that teacher. We've talked about this before. We can't recall her name.
Yeah.
We know that she shared music. I know, I'll give you one memory. A mutual friend of ours, Mike McNanty, was in the class with us. And the teacher had asked us to bring in an album to share.
Yeah.
And he brought in the Bruce Springsteen E Street Band. I can't remember the name of the album. I can't remember the name of the album.
Maybe was I even in the class?
It's the one. It's the white album where it's the classic album. Because I can't remember the name of the album.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But I think
being in the class with Mike and doing that. I don't even remember.
Born to Run, I think it was. I know I brought in the Doors' Greatest Hits, but only because my older brother listened to that, and I think I took his record and brought it in.
Wow.
You obviously don't remember.
No.
And I remember we had a choir that she asked us to sing the Rainbow Connection from the Muppet movie, and I remember Matt Chorba was broke into tears and couldn't sing the song. It was too emotional for him. Okay, so random thoughts. So we're in elementary school. We finish elementary school.
Yeah.
We move on to Jelinas, and Jelinas did have a music.
Well, before Jelinas, there was. Well, I did music in elementary.
Yeah.
So what happened was I started getting into guitar. At that point, where I wanted to play, I started getting into music. I wanted to start playing guitar. And I asked my dad for a guitar. And my dad said, I'm not buying you a guitar. We have a perfectly good trombone upstairs, because my brother had wanted to play in band, and my dad went out and got him a trombone. which my brother subsequently, within a year, didn't want to do anymore. Wasn't interested. So it befell to me now, if I want to play music, that's the instrument I'm going to play because we have one. And so in, I think it was fourth or fifth grade, I started playing trombone, and, you know, that typical upper elementary, learning how to play an instrument in the band, going to the teacher, taking lessons each week. I just didn't vibe with the trombone. And I remember, you know, he would pass out this form of, you know, write in how long you're practicing each day and bring it in, and, you know, and I would write down, you know, 3 hours, 4 hours. And he was just amazed that I was practicing so much, yet couldn't create a sound. Of course, you know, it wasn't true. I was lying. And at a time later, when I put the trombone away, I wanted to play guitar. And at that point, I said, if my dad had made a bargain with me and said, I'm not buying you a guitar because I spent all that money on the trombone and nobody's using it. If you want to get a guitar, you come up with half the money, I'll give you the other half for it. I don't think he realized I really wanted to play guitar that bad. And I went out and I started working, and I got a job, which he had helped me get, at the local bakery. And I would go in after work, ride my bicycle, and I would go clean up after the bakers. So in the afternoon after school, I would go clean up after the bakers, and I would make extra money. At that time, it was like 50 cents an hour, like, because you're a young kid working off the books. I mean, this is not today where people get in a lot more trouble for that. It's kind of like a thing kids did. Funny enough, do you remember a band? They became a very big death metal band called Suffocation. So they were a Long Island band. We grew up with them, the guys, in high school. And one of the guys was a drummer, Doug Bone. And I used to work with Doug in the bakery when we were kids. So we still have that connection today. So I still, you know, we're not very close friends, but we are Facebook friends, and we have that connection from our youth, you know. But I used to work with him back in the day.
That's great. First of all, Suffocation, was it a play on the county name, Suffolk County? We lived in Suffolk.
You know, that's funny. I never thought about that. That would be something I'd have to think about.
So we lived in Suffolk County, and that would have been a clever name, Suffocation, especially if they spelled it, Suffolk.
Because a few of the guys we went to high school with were in the band. Frank, I can't remember his last name off the top of my head. Frank. Doug, at some point, was second in the band. Terry Hobbs was one of the guitar players who's still one of the original members of that band. And another guitar player who I didn't know, but I met years later working at a 7-Eleven, Josh Barron, who I think lives now overseas in New Zealand, possibly.
All right, so strange question. So you're attracted to music, you're attracted to guitar, you're willing to, at a young age, go out and work to raise funds for your instrument. Did you have any childhood fantasies about what you would do with this instrument, or did it not extend further than I want the guitar and I want to play it? Did you already have some kind of rock fantasy in your mind, or?
Well, you got to remember at that time, gosh, we're dating ourselves. There wasn't that much known about rock for young kids. Like, you had television, but television didn't have MTV at the time until 1980, so we were relegated to late night Don Kirshner rock concerts, which might have been on. So I remember seeing some of that late at night, or musicians playing on Hee Haw, or television, various, you know, regular televised shows. And then you also had magazines, but the magazines didn't come into my life until a couple of years later as a teenager. You know, Cream magazine,
Hit Parader,
yeah.
Hit Parader or Hit Parade? I can't remember.
I can't remember. But I mean, at that point, you know, as soon as I discovered the magazines and the rock stars, you were like, oh man, that's what I want to do. And you would go and you'd start, you know, I'd cut these pictures out, and at some point, my entire bedroom was covered with posters of rock stars.
I remember that. We'll get to that. So I'm going to slow this part of the conversation down a little bit and open it up, which is our exposure to the mystery of music. And so we had magazines, we had the occasional televised show,
right?
But we had the radio, and the radio was always on.
Yes.
And so, but now I want to create another image for you. You'd go over your friend's house. They would have a Kiss album, and you would take the album in your hand.
Yeah.
And you would look at the characters of Kiss.
Yes.
And then maybe turn the record around and read the liner notes.
Yeah.
And it was this amazing, magical, mysterious concept. Like, what was Kiss? What were these guys with makeup on?
Yeah.
How are they playing these guitars? You know, I want to rock and roll all night. You'd listen to this, and it was just – it might as well have been, 12th level magic spells that they were casting on you.
And that was probably the first band I got into. I mean – like most kids our age at that time, Kiss was, you couldn't escape the influence of Kiss. They were on television, on interviews. They were on the radio.
They were making headlines.
They were in the movie.
They were making headlines because there was like Gene Simmons bites off Bat's head, or that was Ozzy.
That was Ozzy.
Or or how about this one? Some child tried to breathe fire like Gene Simmons and burned half of his body. Like these,
I do remember like big stories like Kiss Day in some Midwestern town, and
they had a TV show. They had one off TV show.
I don't remember the TV show, but I do remember the movie Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park or something like that, which was on TV. It was a horrible movie, but
that's what I'm talking about. That's the same one. All right, so there were these phenomenal. So we grew up in a time of like phenomenal, like singular phenomenal successes, like Star Wars, Kiss.
Yeah.
Like it was like you could make a short list of these things that it was monolithic culture. There was like these one or two things that would help. It wasn't like the diversity of lots of different things and lots of different diverse media outlets. It was either a magazine or a record cover.
True.
All right. So you get the guitar? You at the
I get the guitar. Yeah, my dad, funny enough, had a coworker who was selling a guitar. He doesn't know anything about guitar. I don't know anything about guitar. And I pay, oh my gosh, I don't even remember. It might have been something like $100 or $75 for a Ventura acoustic guitar, which another guitar, everybody has a story. You got rid of at some point, and it was a really good solid top acoustic guitar.
Steel string,
yeah. It was a wonderful guitar, but still, as a young kid, struggling to play, and it was a dreadnought, so it was huge body for me to struggle to play as a kid. But wonderful guitar. That was my first one.
I don't remember your first guitar, but I will fast forward to my first meaningful guitar experience was with you, where we hung out in your bedroom. I remember all the Motley Crue magazine pages and posters. I think you had a couple of like Cheryl Locke posters as well. Cheryl. Who was the hottie? 70s hottie.
Heather Thomas?
80s. Heather Thomas posters.
Heather Thomas, yeah.
You had these
I also had a huge Marilyn Monroe poster on the back of my door too.
We're in, I don't know what grade, 5th grade, and it's like I'm coming over to your house, and there's these great, iconic, beautiful women posters, and cross-dressing metalheads. And we didn't even think about it. To us, Kiss and Motley Crue were just like magical characters, right? In like some kind of mythical heavy metal story. They weren't real people.
Well, because today, everything you want to know about somebody is on the internet, or you can find interviews or articles or YouTube videos of them talking. And back then, you didn't know what they sounded like unless you saw them on a television interview somewhere. But chances are we didn't see that because we were at school.
Right.
And we didn't really watch the news.
We didn't watch the news, so we had to make up the mythology or whatever was in our minds about these characters.
Yeah.
So, all right, so I'm going to paint a picture for you. It's a hot August afternoon. I have a memory of the memory. It's clear in my mind. We're in your bedroom, and we both have electric guitars.
Yeah.
I think I got an Ibanez Roadstar from Curtis.
Yeah, Parker, yeah.
Curtis Parker. I think you had some kind of Stratocaster.
I did. I had, sometime later, I was working and I was cutting lawns and things like that. And my cousin, Christian, had a knockoff Japanese, I guess, Fender Strat which I purchased from him with, I think, the amplifier too. You know, I never really vibed with the guitar, and I don't know if it was because it was a knockoff or if it was because it was a Fender Strat, and I at that time was really loving like Jimmy Page and Tony Iommi and guys like that, but still I played it, you know, and it wasn't my thing, but I played it. Yeah.
Right. Which goes back to my theory that like even as a child, we knew what kind of guitars we'd eventually wind up with. Like you're a Gibson, more of a Gibson guy, a humbucker guy.
Absolutely.
All right. So I do remember this, getting back to this scene, we're in your bedroom and we're plugging in our electric guitars and we barely know how to do anything.
Yeah.
And I remember we would take our finger and we would pluck a string and then we would slide our finger up. Boom.
Yeah.
And we thought that was the most amazing thing. And we were amazed at just the idea of making a sound on the guitar. And I feel like we're still that way. I still feel like when we touch a string and we move our fingers around, it's still like, this is incredible. It's
that imagination.
So we were lucky to like plug into something like that. And many players would have stopped or many players would have given it up, but we kept on going. So speaking of keeping on going, for the sake of this narrative, let's keep pushing through. So you're now in Jolinas. Are you a guitar player in seventh?
Yeah, in high school, yeah.
Sixth,
or
seventh,
junior high school, yeah.
6th, 7th, 8th grade?
Yeah, at that point, I was playing guitar, and backtrack a little bit. I was started to take lessons on electric guitar because of you. So there was a guy who lived around the corner from me who you had started taking lessons with, Tony.
Tony Mann.
Yeah, Tony Mann. And you were like, oh, I'm taking lessons with Tony Mann. You should too. Tony's really good. So I was like, okay, I don't know anything. So I go around the corner and I'm like, it was perfect because it was around the corner from my house. You know, I just had to walk like a couple blocks. And I don't remember how long I took lessons from him for, but I took lessons. And then at some point you switched. You stopped taking lessons with Tony. And I think the story goes something like this. You were playing bass at the time and you were learning Smoke on the Water, and Tony was teaching you the riff to Smoke on the Water. Dun, 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 dun. And he was teaching that on bass. And at some point you found out that wasn't really the bass line. And I think that bothered you. You're like, this guy's not even teaching me correctly.
I remember
And
this.
you left and you started to go take lessons with Rich Rapitan.
Right.
Another, a well-known player in the area. And my dad, I said, I want to switch lessons. My dad's like, what do you mean? What's wrong with Tony? And I was like, I don't vibe with him. Not because of you per se, but because Tony, I don't know if he's, you know, still alive or, you know, what his situation is. I mean, he's one nice guy, but I remember I was paying for the guitar lessons. Like I was actually going to work and I was paying for the lessons, which I did throughout my life. And Tony was teaching me how to sight read. And I remember he was teaching me how to sight read, and we would spend a whole lesson a couple of times, and he would have the music and he'd point and I'd play. And we did that for a couple of weeks. And finally, me being the obnoxious New York kid that I was, I said to him, I can do this at home. I don't need you to point it out to me. I'm paying for these lessons, not my parents. So I kind of want to learn how to play. And I think that was kind of the starting point for us.
Yeah. Like
that was actually a good learning moment for me, being very matter of fact, and I'll talk about that later if we get to grad school. But at a certain point, I had bought Tony also sold guitars and amplifiers, which I did buy a Kramer Focus 2000 guitar from him and an EG amp. I don't even know what kind of model that was, but I bought that stuff from him. And I just felt at a certain point that this wasn't for me, studying with this particular person. And when you switched over to Rich, I was like, give me this guy's number, you know, and I switched over to Rich. And I remember my dad being like, why do you want to switch? And I explained to him and he said, well, let me look into it. And my dad, I don't know who he talked to. He's like, okay, yeah, I looked into him. He's got a good reputation to study with. And I was like, okay.
And he's further away. So you can no longer walk to the lessons.
He's in East Setauket. So I had 2 choices to get there, or 3 choices. My dad could drive me, which sometimes happened, my brother could drive me because he was starting to drive. I have my older brother. And then a lot of times I took a bicycle and I strapped the guitar on my back and I went to lessons, and that's thinking about it now. It's like, wow, I was a kid who really was determined to play guitar because I was working to pay for my own lessons and I was taking a bicycle to go get the lessons because I wanted to learn how to play.
Yeah, and just to give you a little contrast between you and me, my parents were paying for the lessons and driving me and making sure that I was, so like just a contrast between you and I. I was, I guess I had privilege and was being spoiled, and you were working on your own, autonomous, independent. So it's a really amazing difference between you and I. Now, you and I can't recall any musical experiences that we had together in any of these. I don't think we ever teamed up. We're living these parallel lives, and we were very close friends in elementary school, but we drifted apart in middle school and high school. We're always stayed relatively friendly.
Yeah, I think our music experiences as kids do in middle school, you're as friends in elementary school, you might be rather close, but once you get to middle school, now your world expands. So now we went to a middle school where it wasn't just kids from one elementary school feeding into that middle school. It was kids from, I think we had 3, maybe. It was 3 or 4 schools fed into the middle school. And you got a whole bunch of different people. Not only that, you met a whole bunch of other musicians. And then our musical taste started to change. Like, we still talked and hung out a bit. But I remember you got really into heavy metal and like Iron Maiden. And that really wasn't my thing. I, for whatever reason, stayed in the blues rock genre. I mean, I listened to Black Sabbath, but they still have a very blues rock, jazz kind of, and you went more hard. And I think you might have gotten more into the theater of Iron Maiden with the Eddie.
I loved it.
You were just like, dude, you got to check this band out. Look at this.
Yes. That same kind of fascination that we had towards Kiss is the same fascination I applied to the mythology of Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
All right. So we've painted a picture thus far of how you developed in the early stages, and you and I grew apart a little bit in middle school and high school, enough for me to ask you this question. I don't know what you were doing musically through high school. So take us just quickly through the highlights of your high school experience with music.
Well, middle school through high school, I was probably, oh my gosh, I was wandering trying to play music, because in middle school I played bass. I played on the baseball team for a short time, and then I stopped playing, and then I was still playing music. And at that time you meet other guitar players because you start to scope out who's the other guitar players. And I think we met, like, Reuven was there, and a few other people. I can't even remember who else was playing, but I mean, Greg was there playing bass. My friend Dave was a keyboard player. So we started meeting like-minded musicians, and I was trying to find people to play with who I was digging playing music with, but I kind of didn't have anything serious like bands or anything like that. I did put together a band in high school with my friend Mike. Now, I was working at a restaurant at the time, and I met Mike, and Mike wanted to learn how to play drums. And I was like, well, dude, get some drums. Let's start playing. And Mike actually became a very good drummer, but he went into another field later on. And we put together a band, me, him, and another friend of his, Jack, who was on bass. So there's 3 of us, and we were starting to get pretty good. And then I met another fellow, this guy, Rick, and we put together a group of the 4 of us. And we never did anything. We just kept going to the rehearsal studio. But we started getting pretty good because the rehearsal studio guy had said, man, when you guys first came in, you sounded awful. But, within like 6 months or something, you guys are sounding pretty good now. And we were like, thank you. But that never went anywhere, And then at some point I was taking lessons with Rich, and I was getting to the age of college, and I said, Rich, I want to do music when I go to college. What can I do? He goes, well, if you want to study music in college, you only have two choices. You can study classical or you can study jazz. And I didn't really like jazz that much. I mean, I kind of listened to it, but wasn't a fan. And I said, what is classical? And he's like, oh, it's all finger style. And he played me a little something. I was like, I always wanted to be a good finger picker. I was like, I would love to do that. All right. So we got it. Then I proceeded to start studying more classical.
Okay. And give us a location now. We're going to fast forward to you eventually left Long Island, and it was time for you to make a physical change and start to take your studies seriously. Where did you go?
Well, actually, no, I was still in Long Island, and I went first to Suffolk Community College, and I was taking classical guitar lessons with Rich, but I was studying music at night at Suffolk Community because I didn't graduate on time, high school. So I had to take college credit. So I was going to night school, working during the day, going to night school, taking classes, and started studying music. And once I finished at Suffolk, I finished and I transferred over to Stony Brook. And I was going to take class. I was studying classical guitar. And when I got there, I couldn't study with the head player, who was Jerry Willard at the time. And I studied with his doctoral student, Tom Foggia. So I was studying with Tom, classical guitar. And after a year of studying with Tom, Jerry, he put me at Jerry and said, you need to go study with Jerry Willard. And I said, okay. So I was studying with Jerry classical guitar, and I really kind of enjoyed it. The downfall of that is, as much as I enjoyed studying with Jerry, is that he was not a technical player, meaning he could play. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he played extremely well, but he didn't think about how he played. He just played really well. And as much as he, helped me with certain things, I don't think he could push me to another technical level because he was not that kind of player. And when I finished school, I mean, I was okay, but there were certain things I couldn't do because there were definitely deficiencies in my playing, like sight reading and technical deficiencies. But of course, I was like, well, I want to keep playing guitar because there's nothing else that I want to do. I want to do music, and I'm applying for graduate school. And I applied to a few different schools, which I didn't get into. But I did get into a very prestigious school, which kind of makes me laugh, called the Cleveland Institute of Music, when I was applying. And I told Jerry that. And funny enough, that's where Jerry had actually gone to school. I didn't apply there knowing that Jerry went to school. I just applied there. And he said, where did you get in? And I said, I got into the Cleveland Institute. And he goes, wow, if you had gotten into the Cleveland Institute, I probably should have taken you on here as a master's student. I would have probably taken you. And in my head, as much as, I like Jerry, in my head, I didn't want to stay in New York. So I was like, well, I didn't apply here. I didn't want to be here. So I went to Cleveland. But when I got into Cleveland, that's the funny thing. I auditioned for a guy named John Holmquist, who's since passed. Amazing guitar player. So I got out to Cleveland and I'm applying, and it's the middle of the winter. I think it's January or February. We were doing auditions. So I auditioned. And on the way there, we took a van and I met a Russian guy who was applying. And he was applying for the piano studio of Sergei Babyan, who's a piano teacher at the Institute. And we were talking as we were getting there, and he's like, well, good luck. And I was like, all right, you too. So I finished my audition, and this guy finished his audition. I don't remember his name. So let me backtrack. I'm in the audition with John Holmquist, and I play. And John looks at me, and he's like, okay. And he goes, well, I can see you're very musical, but you need a lot of work. I'm going to have to think about this. And I said, okay. And me, very brash New Yorker, I guess, at the time, I looked at him. I said, well, can I ask you a question, as I'm going out the door? And he goes, yeah, what's the question? And I said, can you make me a better player? And he goes, yes. Very nonchalantly, yes. And I'm like, I just want to let you know, I will work my ass off. So whatever you tell me to do, I will do, and I will make it better. And he looked at me, and I don't know if he hadn't heard somebody talk to him like that before, and he cocked his head and he goes, okay. And he goes, case pen and paper. He goes, I'm teaching at the summer festival. And he hands me a paper. He goes, get in touch with this guy. Tell him you want to go to the summer festival and you want to take classes with John. And I'm like, okay. So I leave the Cleveland Institute of Music, and I'm not sure what's going on. I've never done this auditioning process. I don't know what it's about. Even though I'd done a couple of auditions previously, I'm still new to this whole classical guitar world. I don't know anything about it. I'm just a kid who found his guitar teacher in a guitar magazine, and I'm applying for this school. And it turns out I got in. And I'm talking to this Russian guy who I had met before the audition. And we're talking. I said, how did you do? How'd your audition go? He goes, oh, I didn't get in. And I said, he told you already? He goes, oh, yeah, Sergey told me I didn't get in. And I was like, oh, man, I'm sorry. He goes, how'd you do? I said, I really don't know. He told me to come study at the summer, program. He goes, oh, you're in. And I said, well, what do you mean I'm in? He goes, no teacher is going to tell you to come study with them in the summer before you go to school and not ask you to be in the program. He's like, you're in. And I'm like, okay.
And you attribute that perhaps to that moment where you turned to him as you're leaving and asked him that question. That was a tipping point that separated you from the rest of the mediocre auditions that he probably had heard.
Or better auditions. When I got to the Cleveland Institute, I can honestly say I was probably the worst player in that program. There are a lot of really good players, and I had a lot to learn. Now, I think the catch is not to toot my own horn, but I'm a fairly musical person. I could turn a phrase and I could do this, and I think John heard that. What I couldn't do was technically bring that out as much as I would like to. So, because when you're playing music, you might have a musicality, but if you don't have the technique to bring it out, whether it's picking with a guitar pick or playing with your fingers, if you don't have the technique to bring it out, it's not going to come out as clearly as you would like. So the catch with that being this, John was very intuitive with people. And that year that I got into CIM, he had a collection of students in that. It was a wonderful program to be in. It was fantastic. The people were just the nicest players, very warm, embracing, collaborative, supportive environment of those particular musicians who were there. A couple of years later, when I was still in the program and he had started to get new people in, the program had started to change. He had gotten a couple of people in who were a little more needy, a little more ego-driven, and it wasn't the same program anymore. So I still am in touch with a handful of people that I went to school with at that time, and we are extremely good friends. And we always talk about how he just had that thing about him at that time where he was able to put this collection of people together who worked extremely well. And we hung out and we did all sorts of stuff together. So,
okay, so give us give our listeners, your listeners, a frame of reference of how old you are and what year this is when you and tie up your Cleveland experience. Give us a time frame and give us how it concludes, because you're obviously not there anymore.
Well, I leave New York in 95 and I go to Cleveland, and I drag out the program for 3 years because I need the work. So I'm in Cleveland. I'm studying with John for the first 2 years, 95 to, let's say, 99. And I study with John Holmquist. John is going through some things, personal stuff, career-driven things, and he's kind of pulling back from the program. So I actually started studying with a former competition winner of his, who's now Grammy Award-winning Jason Vio. And I know Jason at that time through another friend of mine who sought him out to take lessons from him. And he's like, oh, you should take some lessons with Jason. So I'm taking lessons with Jason at the time in his bedroom apartment that he shared. People would have 5 people living in a house at the time. So he had a bedroom in this house he rented with like 4 or 5 other guys, or I don't know at the time. And I would go over and I'd take lessons with him. And he was a fantastic teacher. And this guy's a couple of years younger. And he was an amazing player, like virtuosic player at a young age, and a great teacher. So I do all this. And just to wrap it up, keep studying with Jason, but I realize I'm not setting the world on fire. Maybe this is not my thing. I do find a job. In Cleveland, I got recommended to be the adjunct professor of classical guitar for Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. So just to quote unquote build up my resume, now Meadville's a couple of hours away. I don't have a car. I would go and rent a car every 2 weeks, drive to Meadville, go teach my student, and then drive back just so I could have a college on my resume. This is the kind of things people would do.
I did not know this part of it.
And I had one student at the college. I was a stopgap, and I don't mean this for it to sound bad, but I had one student because they had one student who was very serious about classical guitar, and they needed a real classical guitarist, and I got recommended for the position. And I enjoyed it, but that student soon dropped out. And as soon as he stopped going to the school, my position was eliminated. They didn't need me anymore. So hence I went back and forth. So I remember talking to John Holmquist, and I said one time, I think I should go for my doctorate's degree. And John said, why do you want to go for a doctorate's degree? I said, because then I can get a college job. And he goes, but you already have a college position. And I said, yeah. It was John's way of telling me I didn't need to get a doctorate's degree to get a college position to spend all that money. And maybe also his way of saying this might not be, the area that you need to go into.
So you're about 29, 30 years old. And
Yeah.
At this point, what are your degrees?
I have a bachelor's degree in music from Stony Brook. I received a master's degree from the Cleveland Institute of Music. And at that time, my friend Amanda, who was a much better player than I was, oh my God, she was a fantastic musician and performer. We got to talking one day, and Amanda said, you should go over to Case Western. And I said, why is that? And she's like, I'm doing a dual degree. I'm getting my degree in music ed. That might be a good path for you. And I was like, okay. And she goes, and they'll probably pay for it. And I said, what? And she goes, they'll probably pay for it because they're looking for, people to build up their music program. So she goes, go talk to this professor over there. And I went. Sure enough, I got an internship teaching at the college, or not teaching, I shouldn't say teaching, helping out the professors do some work and setting up one of their music labs and meeting rooms. And I did a second master's degree in music ed at Case Western, which was a really good experience. The professors there were really, really awesome. In particular, one of the professors I really liked, who I didn't have that much interaction with, but I think he's still there, was Gary Seapluck. He was a conductor. And just the dichotomy of conducting, learning it at CIM, and the dichotomy of learning in a music ed environment with Gary was completely different. At CIM, it was, if you weren't in the orchestra being a guitar player, you were kind of like an afterthought. And that's just my impression. But at Case, Gary was really interested in you, succeeding as a conductor. He was really a very good teacher at it. And also influential was I guess you could call him one of my mentors, Rob Dunn, who is professor of general music ed. And Rob was a great guy to study with too. And there were other people, as Dr. Bauer there as well, who were also very influential.
Okay, so now give us a hard age, a hard date, an actual age, and you have your master's in education. Are you 35?
No, I'm 30. I'm finishing up my music ed degree, and at that time, I was teaching guitar full time. I had just finished supporting myself part-time as in restaurant work. And I was teaching guitar until I could finally make a living just playing and doing guitar. And I was doing that.
Were you really playing or were you just teaching?
Just teaching.
Yeah.
Just teaching.
And you had dozens and dozens of students a week.
Oh my God.
In your early 30s.
I had close to 70 something.
Cleveland.
Yeah. I had about 70 something students.
Where were you getting your students from?
I taught at a school called the Fairmount School of Music and the Arts. And before that, I taught at a place called Broadway, the Broadway School of Music and Arts. So Broadway catered to more of a low-income families, which was a great school. I really loved the experience, but it was on the other side of town. And I would take a bus there every day, even to just teach one or two students. Anyway, make a long story short, I transitioned over to Fairmount, and I started getting more and more students over there. So I just finally, at a certain time, it was closer to me, and I said, I'm just going to go teach here.
Pause for a second. These students, what was their basic demographic? Were they what age and why were they
Broadway?
studying? No.
Or at Fairmount?
Fairmount.
All kids. I mean, majority kids, but I had some
signing
adults.
up for after-school classes. Give me,
Yeah.
Who are they? What is this program? Is it a day school?
No, it's not. It's just a independent music school, and the word school is a misnomer. It's a place that people went for private lessons.
I see.
You could do private lessons in anything, hence the school. They had piano and band and, when I say band instruments, bass guitar.
Interesting.
Styles.
What an interesting institute.
Yeah, it was
their goal is to educate young musicians.
Yeah.
And they had you as a teacher.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it was two people who taught them. Probably the most at that time was me and another fellow named Ian. And Ian and I were like machines. Like we were there 6-7 days a week teaching 10, 12 students a day. So
how did that land with you physically, mentally, emotionally, having that kind of schedule? It
was fine because I was making a lot of money. It was the first time in my life I was like, I'm making money as a musician, which is funny because at that time I put more emphasis on teaching than I ever did performing. One of the fellows I knew there, Rob, wonderful saxophone player, another guy who's since passed, Rob would be like, dude, why don't you gig? And I was like, why? And he's like, because, you develop another part of your musicianship. And I was like, how much you make, Rob? And he's like, I don't know. I might make $75 for the night. And I was like, and how long does it take you to make that $75? And he's like, 3 hours. And I was like, plus travel and all that. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm sitting on my butt teaching lessons and I make that in like 2 hours. So why am I going to travel when I could just come to one place and have people come to me? And he's like, I get your point, but you should probably do it. And I did gig a little while I was in Cleveland as a classical guitarist, like once a year. I'd find a gig for a wedding or some kind of private party and I would play classical guitar.
Did you love it?
No, because it just wasn't my thing. It's not that I didn't like classical guitar. I just didn't like the performing. At that time. So I'm in my 30s making a living teaching lessons 7 days a week to kids as young as 5 and 6 to adults, basically rock guitar. I didn't really teach classical, although I had some students who wanted to get into fingerstyle. And it went really well. There were a lot of wonderful people. I actually, funny enough, am still in contact with former students. But then I moved on and I was like, okay, I had finished my master's degree at Case Western in, let's say, 2005. And I was getting ready to leave. So I finished in 04 or 05, my master's in ed. And I was like, I'm going to be moving and I got to find a job. But I also taught public school. So I was substitute teacher for a while in Cleveland. So I would teach music sometimes when I was lucky enough. And then I teach high school, substitute high school classes, substitute elementary school, whatever it was. So cut my teeth in education, while I was doing my master's. And funny enough, at a certain point, I had to have a conversation with my boss over at the Fairmount School, Kevin. I said, man, I'm going to be looking for this job. And he said, well, we'd like you to stay. We're trying to do this and we're thinking about this for the future. And I said, Kevin, as much as I love teaching here and I really appreciate the opportunity, I've taught here for a number of years, I don't think you're going to be able to compete with a state job. I'm going to have summers off, a pension, health benefits, as a public school teacher. He's like, you're right. Yeah. So I said, but I'm going to leave. I couldn't find a job I wanted in Cleveland, and all my friends had moved out of the city. So I had two choices. I could move out of the city to go find a job in the suburbs where I wouldn't know anybody anyway, and I'd be on my own, or I could just move someplace else. And I figured, well, I'm going to move someplace warm. I'm going to get out of here. And I applied for several positions, and because of an old friend of mine who, of course, and we mentioned earlier, Mike McNanty, I moved to Charlotte because he at the time had said, well, I'm moving to Charlotte with my family. Why don't you think about moving down here? And I was like, okay. So I applied, and I got offered a position down here. And make a longer story short, I came down to Charlotte.
Okay, so let's start a whole new chapter of this discussion. So you have 2 masters under your belt.
Yeah.
One from Stony Brook in classical guitar?
Well, they didn't hand out a classical guitar degree in Stony Brook. It was a music performance degree, but it was actually just a music.
Okay, so you have a degree, and then you get a master's in education from Case Western in Cleveland.
Yeah,
and you have all this experience under your belt.
I have the bachelor's from Stony Brook, which is just a general bachelor's degree with an emphasis in music. A master's from the Cleveland Institute of Music in classical guitar performance.
Right.
And then a master's in music ed from Case Western.
So you have this 3-part levels of accomplishment.
Yeah.
You're 35-ish.
Yeah. I moved down here when I was 36.
You start a brand new chapter.
Yeah.
So you're not originally from Charlotte, are you?
No.
We buried the lead there.
Should have led there, huh?
Yeah, we should have started there. So we have this voyage of you from a small town in Long Island, New York, then to Cleveland, and now it's like a 3-act play. And now we're in the 3rd act, and you're mid-30s, and you move down to Charlotte, and you're starting brand new, but you have a job.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's actually for the purpose of this conversation, I'm actually going to fast forward to who you are now, and then we're going to backwards build how you got there.
Sure.
So let's talk about who you are right now. Break down who you are right now, the different arms and legs of the body of Matt Ablan's musical identity.
I'm about 18 years into my music education career. I am a performer around the city of Charlotte, playing a lot of solo acoustic, but I also play in a duo, which I've been playing in for the last, 17 years maybe, with my friend John. I also perform with another group called Longleaf. I've been doing the Queen City Music Podcast for the last 7 years, or going on 7 years. And that takes up, a good body of my time, those 3 things.
Let's also just discuss your blog. Because
I haven't done the blog in a year or so, or 2 years, but I did do a blog called the Guitar Teaching Blog. And I did that for, 12 years.
Has it ever been recognized?
Yes, it won it won some online awards. What that means, I don't know, but it got mentioned, and they said receive these awards. So
just creating a little space to see if there's anything else about your musical identity.
Yeah.
How about engineering, mixing?
Currently, side hobbies. I'm into mixing music and learning about that. And I've gotten into playing the Middle Eastern instrument called the oud.
Okay.
Those, they're part of music and they're part of what I do, but I also consider those 2 things, side hobbies of music. It's not like I'm making a living from them. Do you know what I mean?
All right. So if we do a 360-degree look at you, it's music, 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 music.
Yeah, I guess.
And
working out.
And this totality of music, what does it mean to you? Is it something obviously been working your whole life for? Who would you be without music? How important is it to you? What are you doing to add to the conversation in your community, in your environment? Talk about for a moment, if you could, are you bringing joy to people?
One, music is just part of the identity at this point. It's just who I am, what I do. It's just part of me. It's second nature. You know, it's like almost, it's the one thing that keeps it all together for me. I don't know what I would do without music in my life. It's been so influential and kept me occupied and made me happy, made me sad, you know, brought me through dark times, brought me into light time. You know, it's always been there. So it's one thing that keeps me going.
Do you feel as if you don't even have a choice in the matter? Like music is controlling you, or, you know, like even if you wanted to quit, you couldn't? Like, it's not even an option now. It is who you are. It's baked into your personality and your existence.
Yeah. Well, there's also so much to music to learn. And it's not so much that like let's just say, it's not so much I'm a blues rock guitar player and that's what I do and that's the only thing I do. There's just so much out there that to get out there and learn that, like, let's say I don't play as much electric guitar anymore, right? I used to play a lot of electric guitar. And then I got into classical. And then I did that for 15 years or so and kind of put that to the side. And now I'm kind of playing solo acoustic stuff.
All right, let's talk about that.
You know?
Let's talk about acoustic guitar. Take me to you didn't mention at all in your earlier first two acts picking up an acoustic guitar and singing your favorite rock songs.
I didn't
sing.
So
where does this come from? Take us to the origin of like why you are even a solo guitar playing singer who has a repertoire of hundreds of classic rock songs, and you perform at least twice a week, it seems. There was no mention of that up into your biography. So does this come out of thin air, or did you always have this voice in you saying, I can do this?
Okay,
how did that start?
So I never thought I could sing. So back in Cleveland when I was teaching lessons, I used to teach students to strum songs. And I always used this songbook called Easy Pop Rhythms. And the kids could play along with these backing tracks, which nobody sang on, but they would have the melody played by like a saxophone. And it was easy songs for them to strum along with and get that point of having to play in time and follow a chord chart. And at some point, I just started to sing along with the songs because the kids would be playing and they'd be like, I don't know where I'm at. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to sing the song so that you know where it is. And I'd start singing along with them very badly because I wasn't a singer. And that's how I started the singing. But as a music education major, I needed to learn how to sing a little bit because I realized at some point I would need to develop my voice a little bit to work with kids in elementary school. So I started to sing a little bit. I took some lessons, nothing fairly serious, but I did take some lessons with a woman in Cleveland for a bit to develop my voice. And it got okay, you know, taking lessons with her. And then I moved to Charlotte. And I was here for about a year, and I decided to put a band together or join a band, which is where I met my friend John, who I play in with this group to this day. It's almost 17 years later. We play gigs together.
Talk about the origins of meeting him.
John and I met. We found this. I think John and I first met. It was the two of us who started the band. And then we found a guitar player and a bass player. And not to bore anybody with the story, at some point, one of the players became a little bit unhinged. He was very difficult for us to work with. And I was talking to John one day about it. And I was like, I'm getting very frustrated with this person. I don't want to do this anymore, but I'm not a quitter. And I don't want to just quit. And John, to his credit, said, I'll quit. And then we'll just end it. And I was like, okay. So John was like, I'm out. And I'm like, well, if John's out, I'm not going to play if John's not doing this. So John and I left and we just said, well, this is easier. We like working together. You know, and I was trying to sing in that band too. I was doing some of the singing in that band as well as John. So, well, we should just do something together and do the two of us. And I was like, you think it'll work? Yeah, it'll work. And John was always the person with the forethought of, well, you know, it's just guitar and drums, but when you listen to a song, people will be listening to it and they'll just fill it in with the rest of the stuff in their head that they hear. And I was like, okay. And it turned out to be the case, 100% right. So we just kept playing together for years and years, singing and playing together, and which helped develop my vocal ability.
It's fair to say that that's a reinvention of the rock paradigm. You know, you're playing rock songs minus the keyboardist, minus the bass player, and minus the background singers.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, so like then that transitions into actually creating the Matt Ablan experience, which has no John in it. So now you go one step further and you're like, what if the drums were gone as well and I could do this by myself?
No, that was probably more of a happy accident. Like what started to happen is, well, I'll take you back a little bit. I was teaching lessons here in Charlotte for a bit too, and I was doing gigs. And at some point I stopped teaching lessons, but playing with John being a drummer, and he loves to play. Like he will just play, where I'm kind of different like that. I'm like, I need a reason to, you know, he's like, he'll go play for 17 hours. He doesn't care. He just loves to play. Whereas me, always thinking, how am I going to make a living doing this? How am I going to make money doing this? That's kind of my thought process. It's always been my thought process with music is I love it. I want to do it, but how am I going to make money doing this? How am I going to survive doing music? So at some point, John was playing with other people, and he said to me one night, hey man, I can't play this gig. Do you want to try to do it solo? If you don't want to, I get it, but I've got this other opportunity, which I want to try. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. So I played this gig solo, and it went pretty well.
Does it stand out in your memory, or was it just another gig?
Well, I know where it was. It doesn't stand out in my memory like, oh, that was the greatest night. It just started to stand out. And I remember saying over the microphone, talking to people, hey, I was supposed to be playing tonight with my friend, but he couldn't make it. And some lady at the bar turns and she says, you sound just fine on your own, honey. And I was like, thank you. So
isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I was like, okay.
Isn't that interesting, that moment where you just experiment with a different way of doing music. And it turns out it's just fine. Yeah. Because in the end, the listeners, you never really know what the listeners are really listening for. You thought it was you needed this background band or these background things, but people are connecting on levels that you're not quite sure.
Yeah.
You're like me in that you rely on, we're not dependent or codependent on it, but we really love to rely on how we're received by people. Mm-hmm. When they tell us something, we take it to heart. Anyway, so now you're clearly in this new chapter of your life called Performing Matt Ablan, performance Matt Ablan. You the brewery, the winery, the what else of venues?
Oh, there's restaurants and breweries and outdoor concerts and things
outdoor
like that.
festivals.
Yeah,
I saw you
a
couple of years ago at an outdoor festival.
Yeah, and that is a massive learning curve. I always just tell people, it's like there's different pockets of music and everything is different. Performing is different from teaching, and teaching is different from playing, you know, or practicing and learning how to do that. I mean, there's just so much that's different. So, for example, I may have been performing, but it's performing with John helped cut my teeth on performing because I didn't do it that much. He did it a lot previously before me. He played in tons of bands all the time. I didn't do it that much. I was teaching lessons. That's how I made money doing it. And when I started performing, I had to develop who I was as a performer, because when you're doing something, you have to put in your quote unquote 10,000 hours till you become good at it. Right. So you start to develop your stage persona. You're getting used to how you're set up and how everything's going to go. And that takes some time. But also, as you know, it's different playing with a band. It's different playing with a 3-piece band. It's different playing with a duo, and it's different playing solo. Playing with John, you have somebody to rely on and give and play, you know, back and forth in music. And I'm not singing all the time. It's not always up to me what song we're playing. Somebody else is doing harmonies and things like that. When you're solo, now everything's on you. And that's a real learning curve because it's you. Like there's nobody else to look to and be like, hey man, I broke a string. Can you do this song, or can you take a drum solo? Can you talk for a minute? It's you. Oops, excuse me. I've got to take this break for a moment, or whatever the situation is. Everything's about you, and you have to figure it out. If you're doing solo stuff, well, I'm the one searching for the gigs. If I don't search for them, nobody's going to search them out.
Pause for there for a second. Did you have any mentors at this point who were a little more successful in this field that you emulated or brought you under their wing?
No, because when me and John started in Charlotte together, at least, there was nobody. Like, there wasn't as much music happening in Charlotte when we got here. There were a few places to play, but Charlotte hadn't really it was just starting to grow. And the brewery scene and the restaurant scene has exploded over the last 18 years, but it wasn't like that. When we got here, there wasn't that many places to play. But we found places, that had music, and we kind of made our little inroads into them. So
there are times in modern history where new industries pop up.
Yeah.
Computers.
Yeah.
For instance. And there's those early Bill Gates and those Steve Jobs who literally grew up with the beginning of the industry.
Yeah.
I'm feeling, not to put you on the level of Bill Gates, but I'm feeling the same thing. You got in when it was starting, and so you're a part of the whole phenomenon. Now, 15 years later, it's firmly established. If you want to be a guitar playing singer, solo act,
there's a scene.
There's already a scene.
Yeah. And not that there wasn't a music scene in Charlotte, but I don't think there was as many places, and it was relegated to the players who were already established here.
Do you feel like a first generation kind of guy in that way? Like when you when you travel around this town, see the new guys singing and strumming, you're like, I'm like that first generation that you guys are. I opened the door. I was there when the door opened, and now you guys are walking through.
I don't think of it that way. But I do recognize that when I started, when I would see people advertising that they're playing, I knew most of the people's names. Now there's so many people moving to Charlotte that I don't recognize people. Like, I don't know who's this.
So it's a new generation, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. It's always a younger generation. It might be older folks, our age, who have moved here and are like, "Hey, you see it all the time on our Facebook Charlotte musicians community." Is people, I just moved here. I wanted to introduce myself. Where can I find open mics, or where can I find people to play with? And they're just getting here and trying to establish themselves. But the Charlotte music community is a wonderful community. If you're able to make inroads into it, you'll find there's a lot of nice people who are really friendly and giving. So don't come in and be a jerk.
And you're highly qualified to make that judgment because of this podcast and the way you naturally network. You're familiar with a lot of the different people here. So that's great. All right. So you've established yourself as, do you call it a solo act?
I'm just a musician, man. I mean, I play with 3 different groups. Well, essentially, I do solo stuff. I play with John in the Matt and John acoustic duo, and I play with a group I put together, which you helped name, oddly enough.
Longleaf.
Yeah, you used to called it Longleaf. I cut out the trio or the duo or whatever.
I remember this conversation. You were looking for a name, or did you have a name and we didn't like it?
I started to come up with a name, and you were like, why don't you let me name the band? And I was like, really? And you were like, yes.
I said, what's your state tree?
Yeah, and I told you. And
I said, wouldn't it be funny? It's longleaf tree.
And it was like a longleaf pine, yeah.
And I was like, why don't you call it longleaf trio? Isn't that clever?
I think so.
And I think you just dropped the trio and went with longleaf.
And funny enough, when it's the trio, I call it longleaf. When I would bring other players in and it was a duo, it would be called longleaf duo.
Right. That's cute. That's good. And why even have that group? Why have 3? Why even have the diversity, these components, this solo, duo, trio components?
All right, so playing with John all those years was kind of influential because he plays with a lot of musicians, and I started to realize after a little while, after I went and did some solo stuff, that I don't get an opportunity to play with other people much. And I didn't seek it out. So that not having the opportunity is also my own fault. I don't seek it out. So I said, let me find some other people and put together a side group for myself. And through a series of different players, my friend Denise, who I would do some violin and guitar duo stuff with, and my friend Mike, who's in bass. Well, actually, when the Longleaf started, it was me, my friend Denise on violin, and my friend Kevin on bass. So it was the three of us. And then Kevin couldn't do it anymore, and I brought in another bass player, a friend of mine, Mike, who's still playing with us. And so it was us. And then we found a drummer or a percussion player. And not because I didn't want to play with John, I just wanted to play with different people and see what it was like playing with a different drummer. So the four of us we were probably gigging fairly steady for a bit. And then we found out the drummer wasn't going to work out, or the percussion player wasn't going to work out. So we exited from him. And then it became like me, Mike, and Denise for a little while. And then Denise moved out, and she started doing she started going back into her classical roots. So it just became me and Mike. So we would do some stuff with John, and then some other things happened health-wise with my voice, and met my friend Tara and my friend Christy, and put them in. So,
and that brings us up to the modern view of Matt Ablan. You did struggle with some health issues just with your voice.
Yeah, I had a vocal hemorrhage on my vocal cords, which I attribute to going back years ago, like 10 years. I popped a blood vessel years and years ago, which caused this small little, for lack of a better word, pimple, a little bump in my vocal cord. And it gave me a real scratchiness in my voice, which was fine. I know it was good for singing. And for years, I didn't have any problems. And then at some point, about a year and a half ago, boom, I had a vocal hemorrhage. And I think it was the old injury, which was the hemorrhage point. It wasn't just out of the blue. And I couldn't sing.
Or teach in a verbal way.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a lot of issues. And I went through a lot of mental anxiety over it because you don't realize it, or I never realized it. My whole identity is wrapped up in music and singing and teaching and doing what I do. That I was like, what am I going to do? What would I possibly do if I can't
losing fingers?
Yeah, if I can't teach. I mean, I could play guitar, and that's not an issue, but I can't sing, and my whole identity at this point is wrapped up in singing. Solo acoustic, singing with John, doing all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't. This is a whole part of me that I can't utilize. So I had to find some wonderful friends. John sat in on some gigs and sang with me because I had a lot of solo gigs at that point. And my friend Shannon Lee, shout out to her. Shannon introduced me to Tara Taylor, who started filling with gigs for me, and Christy Ormond, who came and filled gigs with me. And I had a girl, Leah, who started filling it with me right at the beginning, and she was able to come in and help me with about, I don't know, let's say 7 or 8 gigs. And she had some other things going on, so she wasn't going to keep doing music with me. But it was good. It's a blessing because I wound up coming away with a good friendship with my friend Tara and her husband, and Christy and her husband. So it was really great to meet other musicians and form relationships. So good things, sometimes come out of something that's bad.
Yeah, I'm seeing a theme listening to your whole story, a story of a great work ethic, of determination, of taking chances, never stopping, never backing down. In this case, you had almost what would be a catastrophic failure in your musical trajectory, the loss of a voice. and you pivoted, you made it happen. You already had gigs on the books that you weren't going to cancel.
Yeah.
You took a pay cut because you, of course, had to share some of the profits.
Yeah.
But you kept going. The Matt Ablan brand kept going. The gigs did not stop. You created a blessing and an advantage, a benefit out of this disadvantage. So that shows, that says something about character right there. Is great.
And much credit to my school, because the folks that I work with at the school were so supportive. Like, and in my administration, like, you take the time that you need, get yourself better.
That's great.
Do what you need to do. And my kids at school, oh my goodness, they were just so sweet about it. They didn't understand what was happening, but I would explain to them and they'd be like, oh, when I would explain to them, they're like, what happened? No, that's crazy. And they would be really good about, supporting me, when I needed not to talk, they would be helpful. So
how is your voice now?
I would say it's about 90%. And from what I understand, just talking to people, it's like any other surgery. After you go through vocal surgery, you are never going to be 100%. I don't think ever again.
Were you singing with some poor technique that allowed this to happen? And have you changed your technique?
No.
Is there anything there?
I don't think it was the poor technique. I think it was me trying to power through. What had happened was, the way I think it happened was, I teach all day and I sing at night. My voice, the way it was explained to me by my vocal therapist, was I am in the top 1% of people in usage of voice. Talk all day during this, sing at night, do a podcast, teach guitar lessons. Like, there was never a point where my voice stopped talking. So you're using it that much. And then I got sick. And one day I was working and I just power through stuff. I'm like, I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I've got kids at school. I've got responsibilities. I got gigs. Keep doing this. I wasn't feeling well and I just kept singing anyway. And I'm singing. And I remember one night I'm at a gig and snap, I can taste blood in the back of my mouth. Damn. And I'm like, okay, the last time this happened was this. It was 10 years ago when that happened. I hope that didn't happen. Maybe I'm sick and, I don't know what it is, but I could taste it. Okay. And slowly but surely, my voice started to get rougher and rougher. But I was still singing and I was still working and I still wasn't feeling well. But I just kept pushing. And I think the pushing made everything a lot worse. So much so when I went to the vocal therapist and they scoped me, which if you don't know what scoping is, it's when they take a camera, they stick it up your nose and it goes down the back of your throat to take a look at your vocal cords. The woman looking at me, one of the therapists, I said, how bad is it? And she said, well, it's not good. And then she walked out and she talked to the other vocal therapist who soon became my regular therapist. Said, I could hear her talk to me. She's like, it's really bad. Like, it's really bad. And so she walks back in and I said, how bad is it? And she goes, oh, you heard that? I was like, yeah. She's like, well, we try not to worry people. I'm like, how bad is it? She's like, it's pretty bad. And she showed me and I could see not only the hemorrhage area of my vocal cords, but how inflamed one side of my vocal cords were. And she said, even if the doctors were going to do a surgery, they would not do surgery for at least a few months until your vocal cords heal a little bit.
What are you doing differently now to prevent another failure?
Number one, I won't sing if I'm sick. That's first. Like, I've had a few gigs at the start of the year. I was like, I'm starting to sing solo again. And I got sick. And I called Tara and I said, hey, I know, I've been doing a lot of solo stuff. I'm starting to try to get back solo, but I'm sick. Can you come sing? And she was like, absolutely.
Now you have those singers in place. You can,
if they're free,
you don't have to sweat it as much.
Yeah. And then, I do vocal warm-ups every day, before work, because I'm going to be talking the whole day. I probably should do them on my days off, but I don't really talk much on my days off. So, I try to rest my vocal cords as much as possible. If I come home from work, I really don't talk very much. So vocal warm-ups, vocal rest, lots of water, and being more aware of my limitations when I'm singing.
Heard. All right. So before we close up the chapter on just your performance, this performance aspect of you, where can the listeners find out where you're playing?
They can hit my website. It's MatthewAblan.com. I'm also on Instagram, Matthew Ablan, and on Facebook, Matthew Ablan Music. Okay. So everywhere. But if you just go to my website, it's MatthewAblan.com.
All right, Matt, the last two major topics I'd like to discuss with you is your oud playing. It's a particular interest of mine. I love the sound of the oud. I love that you do it. Where is it coming from that you even do it? Before you answer that question, I want to highlight for your listeners that you are 1/4 Lebanese.
Yeah, quarter Leb.
And I have this theory that we all come from our ancestors, and our ancestors had some very interesting experiences.
Yeah.
And I'd like to believe that deep inside of every musician exists some connection to their ancestors, and the music they listened to could have been in the 14th century for all I know. Yes, I'm going that woo-woo, metaphysical, that far. Do you feel that you have some Lebanese blood in you and that it percolates to the surface in the form of the oud, or does that not come into play?
It's a really interesting question. I don't know where I got the interest in playing, but I had it for a long, long time.
The interest.
Yeah. My aunt went overseas, my gosh, when I was a teenager or something like that. And I asked her, she said, "Can I bring you anything back?" And I said, "Could you bring me back an oud?" And she said, "What's that?" And I told her, and she said, well, let me see what I can do. And she came back and she brought me an instrument, but it was basically a wall hanging instrument, for decoration. She's like, "I couldn't find, oud to bring back because it was just way too expensive to bring back through customs for you. So I got you this." And I said, "Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. I really appreciate you even checking." And I always had that fascination for it. So a number of years ago, I'm not really clear. I just started to want to do something different, and I came across some videos on YouTube of people playing oud, and a guy who's doing a website, this guy Naveed, it's called Oud for Guitarists. And I was just like, let me check this out. So I decided to purchase an oud, and I'm a complete novice and I can't find lessons and whatever in Charlotte. So I purchased a Turkish oud, and great. I'm playing the Turkish oud. I'm learning how to play. I got a book, start playing through the book, and I'm getting the hang of it. And I'm going back and forth. Like, I'm getting frustrated because I don't really get it. And I'm like, not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I find out that through a YouTube video, and I probably got the wrong oud. I got a Turkish oud, which is tuned a little higher than an Arabic oud because I want to learn Arabic oud. So I take a couple of books. I buy as many books as I can because I'm like, I like going through books to do it. I realize this is not going to work. And I go back to this guy, Oud for Guitar Players, and I decide to purchase one of his online courses. And it's pretty good. Like, there's a lot of information in there, and I go through all his videos and I watch his stuff. And I finally decided to also take some private lessons with him online. He lives in Japan, I believe, and have done a couple of lessons with him virtually. And it's really just, why didn't I do this sooner? Because I guess the New Yorker in me is apprehensive about doing lessons from somebody, and the teacher in me, well, what is this person going to teach me? And I just realized, oh, okay, this guy's a good teacher. He's going to open up the world for me and, show me what to do. But to answer your question in a long-winded way, there's something innate in me which attracted me to the instrument, and that may be because part of my Middle Eastern or Lebanese background as a kid, which, we were always taught growing up on my dad's side of the family, it was always stressed that you are Lebanese. You do have, you are half Lebanese.
You know who else was half Lebanese was Dick Dale from...
Oh, really?
And that's why he played the song Miserlou, which if your listeners don't know Miserlou, go out and immediately Google Dick Dale's
Pulp Fiction.
Miserlou. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. All right. So
I get into it, and basically it's become a real interest of mine. I've posted some Instagram videos of me playing along with songs and drum parts just to, this is my practice. I'm really practicing. Amazing. I'm learning how to do this.
Project into the future with the oud. Just fantasize for a moment. What could you do with it?
Well, I'm actually I talked to you about it the last couple of days while you were here about maybe putting together a world music group. You've kind of been the proving ground for it, like some stuff you're doing in Richmond with your group Habibi. Just putting together, and I'm like, yeah, why didn't I think? Could I do this? Could I find people in Charlotte who want to do something like this? This might be kind of neat, and maybe it might be easier in Charlotte because it's a little larger of a city to find, a little larger with more of a bigger music community than Richmond has, because your area is a little bit smaller.
For sure.
So basically, you've been a good role model. It's kind of funny because you talk about us living parallel lives, and all the years we've been in contact. It's just funny how we do all these similar kind of things, yet are disconnected, and over, I don't know, what the last 10 years or so since we've really, really reconnected, and it's funny how we realize it more, how parallel and similar interest things have happened between us.
It reminds me of like two celestial bodies in the solar system orbiting and being connected by a gravitational force, and sometimes Mercury's on the other side of the sun, and then sometimes it's as close to us as possible. And like we've just had a gravitational force in an orbit that's never allowed us to release each other from our mutual orbits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, all right. Now the final act of this interview discussion is your CD.
Yeah.
Walk us through is it a multi-year process from when you wanted to do it to when it's done? Is it multiple years?
It was a process, and it was never meant to come out. So what wound up happening is I had started getting into recording, and my initial thing was like, oh, okay, maybe I can record like me and John or some solo. The idea was really to record me singing some acoustic songs and just singing and strumming and coming up with some of my own stuff. And what happened was I started to record something, and I was like, this sounded pretty good. Let me see if I can get somebody to play bass on it. So I would talk to my friend Kevin at the time, and I was like, hey, would you like to play bass on this? He's like, yeah. So he records the bass, and I started to talk to John. I was like, hey, man, do you want to come play, drums on this track I'm doing? Sure. So I get John recorded. I'm like, wow, this could really use some other tracks. So basically what started to happen is slowly but surely this all started to take form, which was never supposed to. It was more for fun to learn my recording software and learn how to do stuff so that I could write my own stuff. So all the tracks, I kept the original recordings of them, and that's what is on the tracks. I never went, that wasn't a good enough performance. I always have this old school vibe where if the performance is good, it doesn't matter exactly how great it sounds. It's you captured the performance and the energy. And that's what I felt I did. But I also have this thing in my head where like I'm doing it in Charlotte. I'm a Charlotte-based musician. I'm proud to say everybody who's on this recording is from Charlotte. So Jason Atkins, Greasy Keys, he plays organ and piano on the song You and Me, which we can give a listen to. I can put that in a little bit.
Let's listen to it right now.
Okay. Here's You and Me from my EP, You and Me.
Feel like walking down the street, don't know where
So then there was also, It All Depends on You. So, oh my gosh, I'm going to feel real bad. The piano player, his name is Scott. I forgot his last name off the top of my head. Scott played piano part. I played the bass on it. John did the drums. And then Shannon Lee came in and did background vocals on the track. And then there's a song called The Sleep, which a wonderful local musician who's really making a name for himself, a violin player, Emmanuel Winter, plays on. He does a fantastic job doing that. My friend Kevin Roussan, who also played on You and Me, plays on this track, bass as well. John plays drums on it and does background vocals and percussion. And Shannon Lee does harmony backgrounds on it. And then the fourth and final track is an instrumental. It's kind of my homage to Jimmy Page. It's Bras Noir. And that's just a straight up instrumental finger picking tune. And, you know, it's funny talking about that EP, as it was never supposed to come out, but it was, I guess in a way it was supposed to come out because it's one of those things in my life. I don't know if you feel this way or if many musicians feel this way. I always got asked, "Oh, do you have any recordings? Have you done anything?" And I would always say, no, I don't, that's not something I did. And I always felt that was lacking. You know, I don't have something of my own. And finally, when I did have it, I was so proud. Was that I always related to that moment of Tom Hanks in, what was that movie he was in when he was lost on the island?
Castaway.
Thank you. Where he builds the fire and he's like, "Fire, me, I did this." And, you know, I felt like that with the recording. I was like, I wrote these songs, you know, I'm the one to see it through. As much as I had input from other musicians coming in and playing on it, I'm the one who wrote them. I'm the one who got it recorded. I'm the one who sought out the photographers, you know. Oh, and by the way, excuse me, special shout out to my friend Kevin Brawley, who helped mix the recording for me. He did a fantastic job mixing it up. So there's just so much that went into it that I would just, you know, it's like people always say it, and I never realized it until you do it yourself. Putting out a recording, it's like giving birth. And the songs are like your children, because at a certain point, you know, you have to let them go because they have to go out into the world. And I things that other musicians would say that you would just kind of laugh and be like, "Please stop." You realize, oh my gosh, that is really the truth.
Can I add something to that? Because it's funny you say those exact words about giving birth. I was just saying this to Jocelyn, my wife, in Richmond. I'm constantly working on new material, new songs, and I say that each song is like giving birth, and some births are super easy and some are super difficult. Some songs come out like in the back of the taxi cab on the way to the hospital, like the baby just popped out. And the other songs are like the kid who requires 27 hours of labor, a C-section, and an epidural. You know, like they just didn't want it. These songs, I'm working on a song right now that just doesn't want to come out. And it's like there's hints of it. I can see the baby's head. But the umbilical cord is twisted around it and it doesn't want to be born yet.
But the thing is that sometimes you need to just, I always tell people, finish it. Because, and I have a bunch of unfinished songs that I am going to go back and finish, because you can't leave. I heard somebody say this once and it always stuck with me. Completing something is like doing a circle. You start it and you finish it, and your circle is complete. You don't leave the world filled of unfinished circles, things that you didn't finish.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. It seems clearly from your trajectory, your story, it's like never give up, always move forward, always diversify your interests, your revenue streams, your artistic revenues. Just explore and continue to work. Sometimes it's pure grit and hard work, and other times you let things happen. You know, this is what I'm sensing from you.
Yeah, I think in life I don't claim to have the meaning of life, but to me the meaning of life is you learn. You're here on earth for a reason, and that reason is to learn and grow. That's why your soul is here. Not to get too deep in religion and philosophy, but that's why you're here. You're here for a reason. And I believe that reason is to learn and grow, to feed that soul. And if you don't, you are denying that soul that learning experience. And as you get older, I think that you should be learning and growing and getting better at what you do. There's so many things in the world. It's like eating food. If you were just going to eat pizza all day, every day for your whole life, you wouldn't get much nourishment. But if you are doing a lot of other things in life, let's just equate music, you are nurturing and developing that healthy lifestyle or healthy musical lifestyle. And I think that goes back to, some of the music I listened to growing up. That's one of the reasons I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fan. They kind of got me because when you listen to them, they kind of wore their stylistic influences on their sleeve. You could hear country, you could hear rock, you could hear blues. It was all this stuff. And that kind of got me into other things too, which helped nurture and grow me and help me want to embrace growing as a musician. And the other thing which pushed me is, how am I going to make a living doing this? And I hate to say sometimes it's about the money, but I make a living from being a musician. Everything I do is music related. How am I going to make some living doing this? And I don't think there's any shame in saying that, particularly in the 21st century and the time period we live in where musicians are struggling to make money. You also have to set a realistic boundary for yourself and realize, what does it mean to be a musician? Do I need to be world famous and be Madonna and be known throughout the world and sell millions of albums and tour? Is that your idea of success? Or can your success be local and making a good living doing what you're doing to be able to support yourself? And you have to realize that, or musicians need to realize that, not everybody is going to hit that top echelon of the 0.05% of famous musicians. Because if that's your idea of success, you might set yourself up for failure. However, if you are smart and you try to achieve something like that, you can still get a high degree of success trying to shoot for that. But you have to be open to all possibilities of what might come up in the meantime for you to enable to make a living. For example, I don't think you could just say, or maybe you could, I don't know, but I haven't tried, I'm going to go out and I'm just going to play original music and that's all I'm going to do and I'm going to be successful and I'm going to be a famous musician. I think you might set yourself up for failure. I mean, give yourself some time to do it. There's lots of schools of thought on that. There's a school of thought, if you have a plan B, you may never succeed with plan A. There's that school of thought. But there's also that school of thought of, you should have a plan B and C and D so that you are ready, because the world is littered with musicians who are super talented who never did a damn thing. Because to be successful as a musician or anything else, you need a lot of other things in place, and it's not just playing. You need to be financially set, meaning you need to have your ducks in a row to be able to afford equipment, buy things. You need to have interpersonal skills, playing skills, writing. I mean, there's just a whole host of other things that go into being a successful musician rather than just, I'm going to do this. Because you may not have all the accoutrements to be successful in this one area, period. I talked about being a classical guitarist years when I was younger. And granted, years later, I could be a damn fine player. It doesn't mean I could have carved out a massive career for myself doing it. Because it might have been taken too long and I might have been so blinded by only doing this that I might not have realized the other opportunities that got offered to me for me to be successful. Hence, there's also a lot of musicians, and I'm sure you know some as well, who went along the music path to make a career, but they don't do it anymore. That's not their livelihood because for whatever reason they got frustrated and maybe they weren't able to hit that goal that they wanted to hit. So everything else was just was ever put aside.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're a great example of living the long race. What am I trying to say? The long game.
Yeah. It's long distance, not a sprint.
you've foregone the concept of like immediate, super quick success, and instead you're slow cooking this, taking advantage of practically every opportunity a local musician can take advantage of, every kind of stream of revenue, every kind of stream of creativity. Is there any, besides the world ensemble that you could do with your oud, are there any other mountains to climb for you? Or do you feel like you've come to a place where you've established your mountain range and now you're just sustaining them all?
That's a great question. I don't think I really know what's next. I mean, I do plan on writing some more music and releasing some stuff, but right now another hobby of mine has been mixing music, and I've been taking some online courses. Shameless plug with a guy on YouTube. It's Home Recording Made Easy with Dave Vignola, and just fantastic teacher, fantastic stuff. And it's kind of changed. Taking these online courses just as an educator has really kind of changed my view of education a little bit more. I won't go into my philosophical views on education, but I've opened up a lot more about how learning needs to take place. And I think it would benefit our schools maybe a little bit more if they thought about different ways to approach things for the kids. But I want to get better at mixing music so that when I record my own stuff, mixing and mastering, I can do that myself and
In-house.
I can do it from home.
Yeah.
Because now music is out there. People listen to it so differently than we did when we were kids. They're primarily listening to it on earbuds and a phone. And they're not audiophiles trying to get the best stereo system or even, putting a CD. I mean, maybe people listen to it in the car, but it's not CD quality anymore. Where people are thinking about, the highest quality. Because if you're consuming it mostly on your phone, you're not listening to every nuance, And then plus the walls are taken down with releasing music these days. There's no gatekeepers, as it were. If you want to put out music, you just write it, record it, put it out. The internet's the great equalizer. But there's so many people putting it out these days, But in a long-winded way, I think to me is to continue to learn and grow, get better at writing, recording, playing oud, and put out new music. I think if I have a future in it's creating more music. I think there's other things that I've kind of put aside for a while. I've kind of retired from guitar teaching for a bit. I enjoy it, but I teach all day at school with my kids at schools, and I'm happy doing that. I don't need to teach somebody how to play guitar or a G chord anymore. It's kind of like, it's not as fulfilling as it once was. And I could see myself in 10 years or 5 years going back to it and doing it because I still enjoy it. But currently after 25 years of doing it, maybe a little bit more, 29 years, I'm kind of burnt out on it.
Matt, I have thoroughly enjoyed walking through the different chapters of your life.
Thanks, man.
And I've learned a couple of things.
Thanks.
Where can your listeners find out more about you?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, you can go to my website. It's MatthewAblan.com. That's got everything there from my podcast, clinics that I do, my blog, remote recording where people might hire me as a studio musician. You can also check out my Instagram page, Instagram/Matthew Ablan. I have some reels up there. You can check out my learning curve for my oud playing. I'm getting better. Don't judge. And also Facebook, Matthew Ablan Music. So lots of different things.
Thank you, Matthew Ablan.
Mr. Kellner, thanks for coming up with the suggestion of interviewing me. It's been real surreal to have the tables turned on me.
Thanks, bro. Take care. I love you.
Love you too. Bye. Thanks for listening to episode 75 of the Queen City Music Podcast, and I hope you'll go back and check out past episodes. And if you could be so kind as to leave a review, I'd greatly appreciate it. You can find the QCMP on all your favorite streaming platforms. As always, if you have an idea for an episode or would like to be a guest on the QCMP, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out our local partners, Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com, Reporting from 20XX at reportingfrom20xx.wordpress.com, Queen City Live at instagram.com/Queen City Live Music, and Charlotte New Music at charlottenewmusic.org. Until next month, get out there and hear some of these talented local musicians play.